I needed one last moment alone with you. The itinerary Sienna Reed had shown me yesterday said she should have been halfway to the airport by now, which made the beige rolling suitcase parked on my concrete porch a logistical impossibility. That should have been my warning. I'd been sitting in the wooden chair beside my front door with a frayed length of nylon rigging line across my knee, working a splice-by feel while the neighborhood warmed under a clean suburban morning. The air smelled of cut grass, sun on asphalt, and the faint salt that sometimes drifted inland when the wind came off the bay. Across the street, a sprinkler clicked in hard little arcs. Down the block, someone's garage door complained open. Then Sienna appeared on my porch with one hand locked around the strap of her shoulder bag and the other pressed flat against the front pocket as if she was holding herself together by pressure alone. She wore a buttoned beige cardigan over a high-neck travel top and dark jeans. Her brown hair had been brushed for a trip, not a breakdown, but one loose wave had escaped and stuck against her cheek. Behind her, a silver SUV idled at the curb, its driver watching my front door with the bored impatience of a man paid by the hour and irritated by minutes. The first thing I noticed was not her face. It was the absence. No blue envelope. Yesterday, when she had come over to hand me her spare house key before leaving for a 6-month corporate assignment. The corner of a blue document envelope had stuck out from beneath a stack of grocery circulars on her kitchen island. I had noticed it only because I had spent half my life watching for small, bright things that did not belong on a surface. On a boat, a loose clip, a torn line, or the wrong coil in the wrong place could cost you a mast, a hand, or a life. The wrong thing was the missing envelope. "I lost it," she said. Her voice was completely flat, the kind of flat that did not mean calm. It meant there was so much pressure behind the words that tone had become a luxury. I set the nylon line on the porch table. "Which envelope?" "The blue one." Her eyes moved once toward the SUV, then back to the brass numbers on my doorframe. "Passport, corporate visa, travel letter, everything." The driver honked twice. Sienna did not turn around, but her fingers tightened around the bag strap. "If I don't have that envelope," she continued, "I don't board the flight. If I don't board the flight, David Sterling marks it as refusal to deploy. If he marks it as refusal to deploy, my unvested equity gets pulled and my contract gets reviewed for termination." She said it like a weather report. I stood up, keeping my movements slow. "When did you have it last?" "Yesterday." Her throat moved. "When I came over to give you my spare key." The silver SUV's engine rattled through another idle cycle. The driver looked down at his phone, then at his watch. I glanced at Sienna's suitcase. The handle was extended. A luggage tag with her company logo hung from the side. She had packed. She had tried to leave. The evidence of compliance was right there on my porch. But she had come to my door instead of calling her team lead. That was the piece that would not lie flat. I held up the spare key. "Do you want me to check the kitchen island where you handed this to me yesterday?" "Yes," she said. "Use the spare, please." That single word drew the line. Her house, her choice, her key. I crossed the small strip of grass between our properties and went up her front steps. Her house looked ready for a long absence. Porch planter moved into shade. Welcome mat shaken clean. Blinds half lowered against afternoon heat. Inside, the air was cool and still. I went straight to the kitchen island. I could not remember the exact words Sienna had said when she gave me the key. But I remembered the afternoon light on the counter and the blue edge tucked beneath a grocery circular. I lifted the circular. The envelope was there. For 3 seconds, I stood with it in my hand, looking at the neat block letters on the front. Front, passport, visa, entry packet, urgent. Then I locked her door behind me and walked back. Sienna was still on my porch, exactly where I had left her. I held out the blue envelope. It was under the mail. She took it with both hands. The change in her was small. She pressed the envelope against her cardigan for one controlled breath, then lowered it and looked at the car. The driver honked again. I let the sound pass over us without answering it. My training as a captain had never been about heroics. You do not force a fouled line, you give it slack until it clears itself. I nodded toward the driver. Do you want me to tell him you need another minute, or do you want to handle it? She drew one careful breath. I have to go. Okay. I took the handle of her suitcase only after she released it. I wheeled it down the driveway, lifted it into the SUV's trunk, closed the lid, and stepped back so she could get in without me hovering beside the door. Sienna paused at the passenger side. For a second, she looked back at my porch table, at the rigging line still lying there unfinished. Then she got into the SUV. The car pulled away. The brake lights flashed once at the corner, then vanished behind the neighbor's hedge. I went back to my porch, picked up the nylon line, and found that I had lost the feel of the splice. By late afternoon, a coastal squall moved in from the west. Wind drove leaves sideways, and heavy drops hit the porch roof like loose beads poured into a metal bowl. I had made coffee I did not need and was standing in my kitchen with one hand around the mug when the doorbell rang. I looked through the side window. Sienna stood on my porch in the rain. Her beige suitcase was beside her in a shallow puddle, the wheels wet and dark. Her cardigan was buttoned crookedly over her travel top, rain darkening the shoulders and sleeves. Her hair had come loose from whatever clip had held it, and one hand held the blue envelope under the cardigan like it was a dry match she could not afford to lose. I opened the door. The flight was grounded, she said. Storm over the Atlantic corridor. They pushed the corporate trip to tomorrow morning. I stepped back from the doorway. Come in. You're shivering. I set the suitcase upright near the wall, pulled a clean towel from the hall closet, and handed it to her. She dried her hair without looking up. The rain beat against the front windows. Behind it, the house settled into a quiet that felt less empty than listening. My house feels like a museum, she said at last. I waited. I shut off everything except the fridge, packed the photographs, covered the sofa. I didn't want to turn it all back on for 12 hours. She folded the towel once, then unfolded it, then folded it again. I thought that would make leaving efficient. It made it reversible, I said. Her mouth pulled to one side. Not quite a smile. That sounds like something a man says after spending too much time labeling storage bins on a boat. Boats sink when things are unlabeled, usually in a humiliating way. The almost smile became real for half a second. The spare room is made up, I said. You can stay here tonight. Door locks from the inside. Bathroom is across the hall. I'll sleep on the couch downstairs. She lifted her eyes from the towel. I don't want to be a problem. You're not a problem. You're a weather delay. That earned me a quiet laugh, surprised enough to sound like it had escaped before she could authorize it. I made black tea because she had once told me coffee after 6 made her hands shake. I remembered the detail only when I reached for the tea tin instead of the coffee jar. We sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open between us. Outside, the rain kept hitting the glass in hard silver threads. Inside, the table lamp made a small circle of warmth over a notepad, her travel documents, and the blue envelope. Sienna stared at a spreadsheet that looked less like an itinerary and more like a net. Flight numbers, temporary housing, vehicle allowance, equipment transfer, compliance onboarding. And beneath it all, a small line item tagged base transition. She rubbed the bridge of her nose with 2 fingers. I had learned that tell months ago. During the first week, she moved in next door. She only did it when she was calculating a loss she could not afford to admit out loud. They aren't just sending you for 6 months, I said. Her fingers stopped. She did not look at me. She looked at the spreadsheet, then at the mug. No, she said. They buried the real transfer in the itinerary update yesterday. If I get on that plane tomorrow, my home base becomes Seattle. The 6-month project becomes permanent relocation. If I refuse, David Sterling marks it as non-compliance with the mobility clause, voids my relocation package, and freezes the unvested equity. I sat down across from her. How much equity? Enough that losing it would make the last 4 years feel like I built someone else's house and handed them the keys. Why not ask HR for clarification? I did. She clicked open a message thread. 2 weeks ago, when the first itinerary looked strange, HR told me to ask David. David told me to trust the process. This morning, the travel office told me my file had already been recoded as Seattle-based. Who benefits if you panic and sign? She laughed once, without humor. David, he gets the regional supply chain rebuild off his desk. Seattle gets my client routes and warehouse relationships. Corporate gets to say the move was voluntary because I boarded with documents in hand. And if you don't board, my contract gets flagged before my next vesting date. There it was. Go and lose her home base, refuse and risk her career autonomy. The storm could cancel a flight. It could not cancel a trap. I pulled the notepad to the center of the table and uncapped a pen. What are you doing? She asked. Making the knot visible. For the next 2 hours, we worked with dates, obligations, costs, and leverage. Sienna built the first column, what the company claimed she had agreed to. I built the second, what had actually been disclosed and when. She listed lease break penalties, state tax exposure, vehicle registration changes, remaining furniture storage, insurance adjustments, and the hidden cost of losing local vendor relationships she had built from nothing. I asked questions like, I would check a crew manifest before an ocean crossing, not to challenge her, but to find the weak plank before water did. Date of original mobility clause? She clicked through her contract folder. 3 years ago. February. Does it mention permanent relocation by manager discretion? No, it says temporary operational assignment of up to 6 months with written notice. Who changed the base transition code? David's assistant submitted it, but David approved. Written proof? She opened another email. Here. Her pen moved faster. At one point, I saw her blinking slow down. Her hand hovered over the keyboard, then drifted to the same cell 3 times without typing. I stood, turned off the harsh overhead kitchen light, and left only the stove lamp and the small table lamp burning. Then I slid a fresh glass of water to her elbow. She looked at the glass. I didn't ask. I know. That is either considerate or dangerously captain-like. Both, probably. She took the water and drank half of it. The relief did not solve anything. It just kept the room breathable. We built the map until the legal shape emerged. The company had not given a clean transfer notice. They had buried a permanent change inside travel documents. They had framed consent as a boarding action. They had moved her employee base code before she signed. They had changed the consequence after she started complying. Sienna sat back. So I'm not crazy. No. I hate that I needed a notepad to prove that. You didn't need it to prove it to yourself. I said, you needed it to prove it to someone who benefits from calling confusion policy. Her phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up. From David Sterling. Subject, urgent contract addendum. The rain made a sudden hard rush against the window. Sienna opened the email. I watched her read it once, then twice. The muscles around her mouth tightened. She turned the phone toward me without handing it over. I leaned forward enough to read, Sienna. Attached is the permanent relocation addendum reflecting Seattle-based transition and equity continuity. Signature required by 8:00 a.m. tomorrow prior to rescheduled departure. Failure to sign will be considered refusal of assignment and may trigger review of contract status and unvested equity eligibility. David Sterling. Director, Regional Logistics. Sienna set the phone down as carefully as if it were hot. He moved the deadline. She said, 8 tomorrow, before the flight. She stood and walked to the kitchen window, wrapping her arms around herself. The blue envelope sat on the table under the lamplight. Her passport was ready. Her visa was ready. The trap had simply been moved closer. I've given them 4 years, she said, facing the rain. I missed my sister's wedding for a launch audit. I spent Christmas in a warehouse outside Phoenix because the night shift miscounted medical inventory. I haven't taken a vacation that didn't involve a Wi-Fi hotspot in 36 months. She pressed her fingertips against the window frame, and he just moves the line because he knows I'll step over it. I stood 2 feet away, my hands in my pockets. Everything in me wanted to say, don't go, but that would have been my want wearing the uniform of advice. I had spent years sailing through weather that punished impatience. My flaw was restraint sharpened until it could cut. When someone drew a boundary, I sometimes left them alone inside it. Sienna leaned her forehead against the cool glass. I don't know how to stop, she said. You stop by deciding what you're willing to lose. She turned on me. The motion was sudden. That's easy for you to say. You leave for a living. You cross oceans. You detach from everyone and call it discipline. The words hit cleanly because they were not entirely wrong. She swallowed, but kept going. I live in the real world. Evan, if I don't sign that paper, I don't just lose a trip, I lose equity, I lose a recommendation, I lose the only proof that the last 4 years meant something. You can sail away when things get messy. I can't. The kitchen went still. Rain clicked against the glass. Sienna closed the laptop with 2 fingers, too carefully, and the sound still landed hard between us. I did not defend myself. Defense would have moved the focus from her fear to my pride, and I had no interest in winning that room. If you have to go, I said, you go. It's your career. Sienna, I can't make that call for you. Her face changed. Not disappointment exactly, something colder. She had thrown a line, and I had refused to pull it. I need to finish packing the small things, she said. Her voice had gone flat again. Toiletries, chargers, medication. Okay. I'll use the spare room. Okay. She picked up her laptop, the blue envelope, and the phone. Then she walked down the hall without looking back. I stayed in the kitchen until the storm softened. The house hummed with rain, pipes, refrigerator, all the small land noises I still found strange after months of engines and sails. On the table, the notepad remained open. I picked up the pen, set it down, picked up the frayed rigging line from the porch table where I had brought it in before the storm, and coiled it once. Then I uncoiled it. Then I coiled it again, tighter, which was exactly the wrong thing to do. By the 3rd useless coil, I admitted what my hands already knew. I had given her space. I had also given her nothing to hold. At midnight, I saw light under the spare room door. I did not knock. Slack mattered, and so did the fact that slack was not abandonment. I wrote 3 headings on a page and left it outside her room with a glass of water. What happens if I sign? What happens if I refuse? What happens if I ask for the notice I was owed? Then I went to the couch and did not sleep much. The morning broke clean and sharp. The storm had scrubbed the neighborhood bright. Gutters dripped. The hedges steamed faintly when sunlight hit them. At 7, I sat on the porch with the frayed rigging line across my knee, working the splice again. The line had dried unevenly overnight, stiff in some places and soft in others. I had almost finished binding the end when a yellow taxi pulled to the curb. The engine idled. My front door opened at 7:15. Sienna stepped onto the porch with the beige suitcase behind her. She had dressed for travel again, blue envelope in hand, mouth set in a straight line. The taxi is here, she said to the morning air. I see it. She pulled the suitcase to the top step. I stood and moved toward it. When my hand closed around the handle, she looked at me. Have a safe flight, I said. Her eyes searched my face. That's it? That's it. My thumb pressed into the suitcase handle until the plastic edge left a mark. Sienna nodded once, tight, jerky. She walked down the path. The taxi driver popped the trunk. The lid lifted with a hollow metallic sound. Sienna reached the rear bumper, then stopped. 3 seconds passed. 4. She turned around. She did not walk back. She came fast, boots striking the damp concrete, suitcase wheels bumping once over the edge of the walkway. When she reached the porch, she drew one sharp breath and locked her eyes on mine. I needed one last moment alone with you, she said. The words sounded like something that had fought its way out before fear could edit it. She dropped her shoulder bag onto the porch floor and held up the blue envelope. I can't sign it. I sat in your spare room for 6 hours with the cursor blinking over that signature field, and I can't do it. But I don't know how to fight him without destroying everything. The taxi idled at the curb with its trunk open. I took the suitcase only when she let the handle go. I set it beside the door and stepped back. Do you want me to look at the addendum with you? I asked. You can stop me any time. She held my gaze. The morning seemed to pause around us. Sprinkler clicked, taxi engine, a crow on the power line. Yes, she said, read it with me. I need the knot untangled before I sign anything. I opened the front door and stood aside so she entered first. We went to the kitchen. The table still held the notepad and the 3 headings I had left outside her room. Sienna touched the corner of the page with one finger. "You left this?" "Yes." Not a speech. "No." The smallest smile moved across her face. "That may be the most Evan thing anyone has ever done. Efficient stationery saves lives. It saves one melodramatic logistics manager from texting HR at 2 in the morning. Also important. The humor was thin, but it held. She opened the laptop, logged in, and turned the screen toward me. I stood beside the opposite chair, not leaning over her shoulder. "Ready?" She nodded. The addendum loaded. I had negotiated Port Authority manifests in 12 countries and handled maritime disputes under bad weather deadlines. A relocation addendum was not a storm. It was a badly tied knot under a clean label. I read the document once, then again. Sienna watched my face while I pulled the notepad closer and wrote Section 4B. "Here," I said, turning the notepad so she could see. "They cite California labor law because the company is headquartered in San Francisco. Your contract says sponsored relocation has to comply with the law of the corporate sponsor, not the temporary assignment location." She leaned forward. So a forced permanent relocation tied to equity continuity requires a minimum notice period. In your case, 60 days. David gave you less than 24 hours and disguised the relocation as an itinerary update. She stared at the screen. I tapped the next line with the back of my pen. He also changed your base code before you signed, which weakens their argument that this is voluntary. Her hand moved to the bridge of her nose, then stopped before she touched it. He's bluffing. He's using panic as a shortcut. People who are exhausted don't read the fine print. Exactly. She looked at the laptop for a long time, then filled a glass of water, drank it, and came back. The action was simple. It changed the air. "What do I say?" she asked. "You tell the truth in a form HR can't pretend not to understand." I drew 3 boxes on the notepad. Original assignment. Improper addendum. Requested remedy. I did not write the email for her. I wrote questions. Are you willing to complete the original 6-month assignment? Are you declining only the permanent relocation addendum? What notice period are you owed? What action do you want documented before 8 p.m.? Sienna read the boxes, placed her fingers on the keyboard, waited 3 breaths, and began typing. "Dear David, I remain willing to fulfill the original 6-month operational assignment as disclosed. I do not consent to permanent base transition under the attached addendum. The addendum was delivered less than 24 hours before departure and appears to alter equity conditions and employment-based status without the required notice period under the governing sponsor state labor requirements referenced in Section 4B. Please confirm in writing that my current contract remains active. My unvested equity eligibility remains unchanged, and any permanent relocation discussion will be reviewed through HR with the required notice period. Regards, Sienna Reed." She read it once. I said nothing. She read it again, then added one line. "I am available to continue supporting the regional supply chain remotely or on the original temporary assignment terms." She looked at me. "Too much?" "No, that's the line that proves you're not refusing work. You're refusing manipulation." Her jaw tightened. She clicked send. The email vanished. The kitchen seemed to exhale. The taxi horn sounded once outside. Sienna stood, walked out the front door, and went down to the curb. I stayed on the porch. This was her call to make. She leaned into the driver's window, handed him cash, and spoke for 20 seconds. The driver nodded, closed the trunk, and pulled away empty. Then her phone rang. The name on the screen was David Sterling. She looked back at me. "Do you want me beside you?" I asked, "or do you want privacy?" "Beside me," she said, "but I'll answer." She accepted the call and put it on speaker. "Sienna," David Sterling said. His voice was smooth in the way men sound when they expect their title to do half the work. "I saw your email. This is an unfortunate response to a standard operational requirement." Sienna sat at the kitchen table. She pulled the notepad closer, then confirmed the original assignment terms in writing. "This is not a negotiation." "No," she said. Her voice shook once, then steadied. It's a documentation request. I kept my eyes on the notepad and turned the page so section 4B faced her. David was silent for a beat. You understand refusing the relocation may affect your equity review. My email confirms I am not refusing the original assignment, Sienna said. I am declining a permanent relocation addendum delivered without the required notice period. If you believe my equity review is affected, please state the clause and notice basis in writing. A pen clicked on David's end, or maybe a keyboard. You've had advice. I've read my contract. David exhaled through his nose. HR will need to review. Please copy me on the HR review request. This is an aggressive posture. Sienna. Her hand curled around the pen. Her knuckles whitened, but her voice remained level. No. David. It's a paper trail. The kitchen went completely still. Then David said, "Stand by for a written response." The line ended. Sienna set the phone down carefully. She did not collapse. She did not celebrate. She reached for the glass of water and finished it in 4 steady swallows. That was terrifying, she said. Yes. I think I sounded calm. You did. I did not feel calm. That part is optional. The laugh that came out of her was shaky enough to be true. At 8:07, the first HR email arrived. By 8:31, Sienna's travel portal changed from Seattle-based transition pending to assignment deferred. By 9:12, HR confirmed permanent relocation review was suspended pending compliance evaluation. At 9:30, her regional director, Patrice Nguyen, joined a call from the warehouse office. Sienna, Patrice said, I don't know what David thought he was doing, but the Pacific Northwest transition is now frozen. We have a different problem. The regional supply chain map he reassigned from you is a mess. Seattle can't untangle it from their end. Can you remain local and run the emergency route review from your current base for the next 2 weeks? Sienna stared at the laptop. I watched the question move through her. Not can I survive this, but what do I actually want to choose? Yes, she said, on current base terms, I want the assignment scope in writing, and I want confirmation that my equity remains active. Patrice did not hesitate. Done. And David doesn't route instructions through travel services again. A pause. Then Patrice said, also done. Sienna closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, she was no longer gripping the edge of the table. We spent the rest of the day turning crisis into structure. There was no cinematic victory music. There were email chains, assignment scopes, compliance language, and one miserable spreadsheet with broken route codes from Seattle to San Jose. I made soup from what I had: onions, rice, carrots, chicken stock, and an optimism that was mostly seasoning. This is very Captain Food, she said, looking into the bowl. It prevents mutiny. It is beige. Safe food is often beige. She took a bite. Annoyingly, it's good. I'll put that on my tombstone. The stove lamp glowed over the table. Her laptop, my notepad, the blue envelope, and the frayed nylon line shared the same small working space. Every few minutes, she asked for a second set of eyes on a date or a route handoff. I answered when asked, when not asked. I worked on the rigging line, giving my hands something patient to do. At 4 in the afternoon, David sent one last message. Sienna opened it, read it, and pushed the laptop toward me with one finger. David had written that the permanent relocation addendum would be withdrawn pending legal review. Her equity status would remain unchanged. Any future base transition would require formal notice. He ended with the phrase, "Thank you for your flexibility." Sienna took my pen and wrote beneath the printed email, "Flexibility is not consent." Then she folded the page and slipped it into the blue envelope beside her passport. That night, she went back to her house to turn the power on and uncover the furniture. I offered to carry the suitcase back across the grass. She shook her head. "I can do it," she said. "I know." She pulled the suitcase down my porch steps herself. At the property line, she stopped. "Evan?" "Yes." "When I accused you of detaching from everything, you were scared. I was also unfair." I leaned one shoulder against the porch post, keeping my hands wrapped loosely around the rigging line. "Both can be true." She looked down at the suitcase. "You didn't tell me to stay." "No. Part of me wanted you to I know. Why didn't you? The answer sat between us, plain and difficult. Because if you stayed for me, you might resent me every time work got hard. If you left for them, you might resent yourself. I needed the decision to belong to you. She turned that over in the quiet. Then she nodded once. That is either very healthy or very frustrating. Again, probably both. This time her smile stayed longer. She crossed to her house, unlocked her front door, and disappeared inside. A minute later, warm light came on in her living room for the first time since she had packed it away. I went back to my porch and finished binding the end of the nylon line. Over the next 2 weeks, the neighborhood learned a new rhythm. Sienna's house stopped looking like a museum. The blinds went up. The porch planter returned to the sunny side. Delivery boxes appeared, then disappeared. Her kitchen light stayed on late while she rebuilt the regional route model on her own terms. Twice, she came over with her laptop and a question. 3 times. I went over with dinner I pretended I had made too much of. One Friday night, she opened her door before I knocked. "That smells like beige soup," she said. "It has evolved. There are green things in it." Reckless. She took the container from my hand and stepped aside. On her dining table, the blue envelope had become a folder. Inside it were copies of the withdrawn addendum, HR confirmation, the regional assignment scope, and a handwritten checklist of boundaries for future work travel. She had labeled the folder Current Base, not Temporary Self. I did not comment on it. I only noticed the label and felt something settle behind my ribs. She caught me looking anyway. "Too dramatic?" she asked. "No." "Too logistics manager?" "Yes." "Good." By the end of the second week, Patrice confirmed Sienna would remain at her current base unless she personally requested relocation. David Sterling was removed from direct oversight while HR completed review. The supply chain model she repaired was adopted across 3 states. Sienna printed the confirmation, put it in the folder, and later placed the blue envelope on my porch table beside the frayed nylon line. "I used to think choosing a place meant giving something up," she said. "Sometimes it does." She looked at me. I lifted one hand, honest answer. "That's your worst and best quality. I've been told." She ran her finger along the edge of the blue envelope. "This time it feels like getting something back." I did not answer right away. The air smelled of cut grass again. The nylon line lay on the table between us, no longer frayed at the end. 6 months later, the weather had turned to a crisp autumn chill. The neighborhood center was hosting a community charity auction, the kind of event with folding chairs, donated wine, too many clipboards, and one retired judge who took the silent auction rules seriously. I stood near the back wall holding 2 coats, watching Sienna navigate a conversation with Patrice Nguyen and 2 corporate colleagues who had driven in from the city. She wore a simple navy dress under a cream blazer, her hair pinned back, her posture easy in a way I had not seen that first morning on my porch. She was no longer bracing for departure. On the table near the entrance, a local sailing club had donated a framed nautical chart for auction. Someone had placed a decorative knot beside it, tied incorrectly. I stared at it longer than necessary until Sienna caught me looking and mouthed, "Do not fix the charity knot." I looked away with dignity. A few minutes later, Patrice gestured toward me. I could not hear the question over the noise of the room, but I saw Sienna's answer before she said it. Her shoulders did not tense. She did not look around for an exit. She did not soften the truth into something easier for other people to categorize. She walked across the room, took the second coat from my arm, and slipped her hand into mine. "This is my partner, Evan," she said, clear enough that the nearby table heard. "He's the reason I read Section 4B before breakfast, and the reason I know the difference between slack and surrender." Patrice smiled. "That is a very specific recommendation." "He is a very specific man." I shook Patrice's hand. Sienna's fingers stayed linked with mine, steady enough that I did not have to check where I stood. Later that night, after the auction lights were turned off and the retired judge had been gently separated from the bid sheets, we returned to my porch. The air was cold enough to turn our breath visible. On the table sat the same nylon rigging line, neatly whipped and bound at the ends, serving as a paperweight for Sienna's mail. Her blue envelope rested beneath it, no longer urgent, no longer missing. Sienna sat beside me with both coats over her lap. "You still have this line," she said. It was a good line. It was a mess. Most good lines are at some point. She touched the bound end with one finger. "You gave it slack. Eventually." Her shoulder brushed mine, light and deliberate. "You gave me slack too. I almost gave too much. You came back with headings. That was my grand romantic gesture. It was terrible stationery. It worked." She smiled, and the porch light caught the small gold flecks in her eyes without making her look fragile or far away. She looked present, chosen, entirely herself. I looked at the line, the blue envelope, the porch steps where she had stood with a suitcase, and the quiet street beyond. You do not force a fouled line. You give it slack until it clears itself. After it clears, you still have to bind the end with care. Sienna slid the envelope under the nylon paperweight and stood. "Come on," she said. "I made tea at my place." "Black tea?" "With lemon." "That's new. I'm experimenting with non-beige flavors." "Dangerous." She held out her hand. This time, there was no taxi at the curb, no deadline blinking on a screen, no suitcase waiting to decide the shape of her life. I took it. "The end,"